My best friend had been hiding a massive secret from me for years now. I'm terrified of him. Part 2. After I told Mark about Ben, he suddenly started acting distant out of nowhere. We had been friends for almost 3 years at that point and hung out once or twice a week, but I only saw him once after Ben and I started dating. I invited Mark to the opening of this new bookstore I was excited about. The day had been going great and we were both having a lot of fun buying books for each other until Ben called me and I answered for a second just to tell him I would call him later. Well, as soon as I finished up the call with Ben and turned back to Mark, his mood had totally transformed. He didn't smile for the rest of the day and just gave me short dry answers when I kept trying to make conversation. Like I said, we had been picking books out to buy each other, but after we finally checked out and I asked if he wanted to get lunch, he just said no and left pretty quickly with all the books he had supposedly chosen for me. He was usually one of the sweetest guys I knew, and I had never been treated so coldly by him. I texted him that night and asked if I had done anything to upset him and he just said no and started telling me about how he's writing a book and he'd like to get my opinion on his first draft. I guess I was just happy to move on and change the subject, so I told him that I would love to read his draft and we made plans for me to come to his apartment to read it the following week. I thought things were finally going to start looking up between us, but that day changed everything. As soon as I got to Mark's apartment I could tell the vibes were weird. It was the middle of the afternoon but he had lit some candles and had smooth jazz playing quietly when I got there. It was like he was doing some cheesy pickup artist routine, but I just ignored it and asked him where the first draft of his script was. He ended up leading me into his bedroom, sitting on the bed, and tapping the space next to him as he took the manuscript out of his bedside table. I admit, I guess I should have listened to my gut and left right then and there, but I shook off my instincts and tried to trust my best friend of 3 years at that point. Mark just stared at me for 45 minutes straight as I read through his manuscript. Once I realized what the plot was about, I was sure that I should have never even stepped foot in his apartment. His book was about 2 friends from college who ended up falling in love. There's this huge monologue towards the end from the male character where he tells the female character that he's been in love with her since the moment he laid eyes on her and that he's sure they will end up together no matter what she believes. I didn't want to assume anything, but at that point, I started to connect the dots and realized that his book was probably based on us, and what I thought was a strong friendship. I tried to read extra slowly because I just didn't want to talk about it, but when I finally finished, Mark grabbed my hand and told me that this was his way of admitting his feelings to me. He said that we had always bonded over our writing and that he hoped I could understand how deep his love was by reading it. I told him that I was in love with Ben, and that it was wrong for him to admit these feelings knowing I was in a relationship, and he started crying angry tears as he realized I was rejecting him. He started begging for me, and I tried to get up to leave. He grabbed my arm and begged me to stay, asking me why I had let him on for so long. I started to get scared and used my other hand to call Ben. I just kept asking Mark to let me go, and that's when he tried to kiss me and I yelled at him to get off me. That's when Mark collapsed to the floor and started hitting himself in the head. I finally managed to run out of the apartment at that point. I was so scared and full of adrenaline that I ran all the way down the block, until I realized that I was still on the phone with Ben. I broke down on the phone and told him to please come get me. When Ben finally picked me up and I fell into his arms, he told me he had heard everything on the phone and apologized that I had been put through that. He admitted that he suspected that Mark had been in love with me for a long time. I asked Ben why he had been okay with me still being friends with Mark if he knew he liked me, and Ben said it wasn't his place to choose my friendships and that he loved and trusted me. He added that it wasn't my fault if Mark was crushing. I asked him why Mark would ruin our friendship like that, and I admitted to Ben that it hurt me to lose someone I considered a best friend. Ben just listened to me as I cried and vented. When we got home, he tucked me into bed and rubbed my back until I finished crying. He said that he felt lucky to call himself my friend and boyfriend and that I was sure to make better, more respectable friends because I was a perfect, poetic little people magnet.